Okay. So this title literally is my reaction when I got the invitation. I was thinking introspection, introspection. Um, there is no introspection. What could that be, right? Or maybe everything is. So it sort of threw me for a loop. And I remember that when I moved to Stanford in 1993, so almost a quarter of a century ago, the first person I met was a philosopher of mind. Um, and so I sent him an email and said, so what do you guys, philosophers, say about introspection? And yeah, so he sent me some papers that was kind of interesting. I want to talk about that a little bit. um, the first thing when you think about introspection is sort of looking in your own mind, right? I mean, if you introspect, you're sort of thinking about your own internal processes. And that reminded me of this fallacy, which is called the homunculus fallacy, that people have talked about in computer vision. So the idea is that somehow this person is observing an external scene, and inside the head is some process that is processing that image. Right? So we have the image is that there's some projection of an image, and somebody is sitting inside analyzing that image. And the fallacy consists in the question, or arises from the question, well, what happens inside the head of that homunculus? And so you get this infinite regress. Right? And so when we talk about introspection, we should make sure that we don't fall into this trap. Right? So somehow we need to ground things. By the way, if you, I'm perfectly happy to give up the entire presentation for discussion. So if, okay. So I think we sort of have to be careful that, and somehow this arises from the dichotomy of perceiving the image, which is the picture with the fried egg, and analyzing the image, right? If you create such a dichotomy, then you run into trouble. And the same might be with introspection, right? That if you separate the generation of the thing that you want to introspect from the process of introspection, you could run into the same fallacy. But let's think about philosophy for a second, just because I think it's interesting to look at what philosophers sort of consider important. Philosophers have at least, obviously philosophers don't agree on what introspection is, otherwise that would be done. But they agree on three things. There's three conditions. One is called the mentality, and these are kind of obvious. The mentality condition, and that is that we're generating insights about something that happens inside, right? Mental events, states, or processes, not something about the outside world. There also is the first person condition. This means that it's about your own mind, not about somebody else's mind. And then the other one is the temporal proximity condition. So this is temporal proximity. That means that somehow this insight needs to be close in time, right? It's not introspection to think, well, yesterday I was sad, at least according to the philosophers. Right? Introspection is something about the mental state that somehow has to be close to one's currently ongoing mental life only, they say. And then the three other conditions that I think are more interesting, where people don't agree, but many people think that these need to be also satisfied. So these are the ones that are pretty much agreed upon. And then there's one that's called the directness condition. And that means you basically obtain judgments or knowledge about your current mental processes directly or immediately, right? So it's not that you look in a mirror and you say, oh, I look sad, so therefore I must be sad. It's something that happens immediately. Another one is called the detection condition. And you see that it's sort of getting very technical. Detection. It's attunement or detection of a pre-existing mental state, right? So you detect something that must be there. If the process by which you perform this philosophical introspection creates that mental state, then it's not introspection. And the last one is effort. Nothing in life is for free, also not introspection. This is supposed to be an E, but yeah. So basically, they're saying that this introspection is not effortless. You have to invest something. So I'm not going to comment on whether I think this makes sense or not, but these are the conditions that philosophers have come up with. And to me, it's unsatisfying, right? I mean, right? I think it's very strange. And I feel confirmed, if you try to define something and you come up with a definition that looks like this, personally I think something is missing. But anyway, so that's what the philosophers say. But let's look maybe at biology. So here we have a brain, and there's an eye that's supposed to be attached to the brain. And so let's take a look at what might be going on. So we know in the brain there are brain regions, right? So there are regions that are associated with, so let me just fade that out a little bit so you can see better what I'm drawing. So there's these regions and they're associated with certain functions. At the same time, we know, and I think this is sort of beyond question, that on the retina there are some nerves that receive light. And so inside each of these brain regions, we know this, this is a part of your neocortex, and we know that there's sort of 7 layers in your neocortex, and some connections between neurons are going up, some connections are going down. So, there's some kind of processing of information that happens here, right? Up and down, up and down, up and down is going on continuously. And you know that there are sort of several of these regions, right? And the assumption is that all of these sort of are of similar structure and that somehow they're connected. So you know that there's information sent from the eye to these regions, and you could think that these regions sort of communicate. Actually, we know that these regions communicate with each other, right? So there's some network of these interconnected regions. So now the question is, what's introspection, right? So if somehow I should draw the arrows both ways for these things connected here. So we now have one of these loops that's connected to the eye, and that receives sensor information from that eye. So that probably would not want to call it introspection because it's just processing information that comes directly from the outside. But then the second loop is not receiving things from the eye, it's receiving things from some other brain region. Is that already introspection? Well, we can start comparing this to the conditions of philosophers, but that doesn't really help us so much because we don't even know if we agree on these conditions. But from an information processing perspective, two things are striking to me, right? One is that there are loops that are connected to the outside, and there are loops that are connected to other loops. So we might arbitrarily say that if the loop is not connected to the outside, it's by definition performing introspection. And that these loops are actually similar, right? I mean, the loops performing sensor information and the loops performing introspection, if we want to follow this definition, are identical. So, I don't know. I mean, this could be a model, right? Is something missing here? I mean, do we know something about the brain that is not captured here? Question to you. Would you like me to add something to this picture? Because if you cannot think of something, then we're in a very comfortable and easy situation. Right? We know that the brain consists of regions that are interconnected. Right? These are long axons that are connecting different brain regions. And we have sort of these things going on in the brain, that one brain region gets active when something happens. And it turns out that actually there is kind of a stage-wise progression in the brain from the front to the back, right? So there's visual processing, and there's planning, and there's feedback processing, and so on. And then in the back of your head, you have your motor cortex. So, is it the other way around? Okay, it's the other way around. But, this seems to give a nice, simple picture, right? So I actually like simple things, so unless you have serious headaches now, or tummy aches, I would just say let's go with this. I'll wait for a second to see if some headaches develop. Yeah, so very good, right? So you need something how these work together. So I'm going to draw another one, and it's possible that they just work together by passing information to each other. One thing that we did forget here is that somehow there needs to be action, right? So somehow the outcome of this process is some kind of interaction with the brain. I mean, that's the whole purpose of having a brain.
So it's that goal. So how do I know?
Okay, so I'm going to pick a different color because so now you're saying there's something in here that provides a goal, and I'm saying that is magical, right? Because the only thing that we have are sensor input. That's the green stuff. I mean, the green stuff in the eye, and there's no other input. Well, actually, there is lots of other input from evolution, right? So the way this is structured, we'll talk about that in a second. But yeah.
Maybe, I mean, if you see it as a condition rather than a full definition, like you can, it's nice to say, well, if it's a loop and it's not directly connected to sensor information, then it could be introspection, but it's not everything like that is introspection.
Yeah, so the question becomes, what do we actually want to call introspection here? Because if the loops are the same, then the process is actually not different from just information processing, whether it's on raw data or on...
But the loops are only the same because you drew it like that.
Well, so that's what I'm asking.
Different color. That's the answer, different color.
Different color. But the question is something missing in this picture that we know about the brain? Is there, I mean, we have a sensor for light. Okay, do we have a sensor for introspection? Is there something in the brain that connects to the brain that perceives the state of the brain? No. I mean, not as far as we know.
So, flipping that around, can you look at this and tell me that that explains how I can look at something and question my own beliefs about whether that is actually what, how well I'm positioned to actually say what that thing is?
Well, so I haven't solved AI yet, but that's the way I want to go, right? I mean, I want to go and present work that I think can make this argument, right? So that in a way, if the further right to the goal, the more abstract you could think these loops are getting, right? I mean, the first picture is processing probably, I don't know, cardboard filters on the retina. Actually, this happens already in the retina itself. But so it's processing some low-level features, and it's distilling this low-level information into something more abstract, and things continue.
Right, but I'm taking your question as to do you believe that anything's missing, and I'm saying not being an expert on any of the biological side of this. Does that picture explain that I can introspect about my assessment of what the world state is right now? Does that explain it?
Well, so you're asking the question, what is introspection? And the question is...
No, I'm asking whether that explains that.
Yes, I think, well, but whether something explains concept X can only be tested once you know what X is. Right? I mean, we gotta agree on what introspection is before I can tell you what this explains. And I think that's not clear. I mean, you're asking me to tell you whether this explains introspection, right? That's a question that you're asking me.
I'm giving you a fairly concrete example. What we call introspection. I worry a little bit that this terminology now, even though I'm very attached to it, that the terminology is somewhat distracting from the thing that we're trying to achieve.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so same with it.
Same with it.
Along those lines.
Okay.
So is your point here that actually the whole focus on introspection, as the term introspection suggests, is a bit of a red herring?
I think introspection is ill-defined. It's ill-defined, in my view, as a non-philosopher in philosophy, and I think because it involves this dichotomy, right? That something is going on and something else is introspecting into that, right? So they.
Okay, but there are examples in different fields where actually it is acknowledged that something like that happens.
Okay, so let's look at some examples.
Okay, excellent.
So here's a very simple control loop, right? And so you could argue that maybe introspection is what's going on here, right? Because we're taking reference input, which is part of my internal state. I'm comparing that to an external state. So in a way, I'm introspecting because I'm taking what it's supposed to be and what it really is, and I'm creating some action, right? I mean, if you go back to this picture, that's exactly, it's just one loop, but this fits exactly this picture.
Yeah? It will be directly connected to sensory. Yeah.
But do you consider introspection to be only conscious process or?
Well, so the philosophers. Well, let's not talk about it. For me, I consider I think neither introspection nor consciousness has any physical grounding. It is words that we use to describe our experience, right? And our experience depends on many things in addition to the actual information processing, right? So I mean, we're complicated results of evolution, right? So what is consciousness? I mean, so I think that's a new workshop.
What I mean is that is introspection your internal, let's say, your internal speech. Is it? I mean, this is something that neuroscientists agree. There is something called figural speech that you can think about your own actions. You can reason on them, which is on the level of a, let's say, central computing on the brain, and it's well, it creates some brain regions that, for example, also force them to produce speech and understand speech, but they are like language regions. So is introspection that process, or is introspection process that if you imagine seeing something, it's a different thing in the brain? I mean, from a biological point of view.
I mean, in my view, introspection isn't defined, so you can pick what it means, right? But the philosophers, for example, they say this is not introspection. If I say I am saying the sentence that ketchup is tasty, then while I say that, I know that I'm saying that, right? But that's not introspection. That is just knowledge about what I'm doing. So I think introspection is, I think as this discussion shows, it's a super hairy concept. And I don't think we need it to discuss what I think you guys intended with this workshop, which is reflecting on things that are going on, right? So basically in this picture, any loop that's not connected to sensory information could be in that sense introspection. Right, so let's look at this example, right? So this is control. Here we have a bass filter, right? So these things here are all internal models. And yeah, I mean, by combining our belief with sensory information, it is, a merging of internal state. I mean, I would call that introspection. Or, emotion blending. When you sample your world, based on the samples that you've already taken, I mean, you're using your internal state to guide your next action. I don't know anything other than to call that, according to some vague definition of introspection, to call that introspection. So basically, every algorithm that uses any piece of information becomes introspective. And then the definition of introspection becomes much less interesting because, I mean, either you have a direct mapping from sensor to output, that you could argue is not introspective, or anything else is introspective. So anything that's interesting is introspective. Yeah.
So you asked whether introspection or what I call introspection. I think it is something different. Something different. It's a separate piece of process. But I'll come back to it.
Okay, sounds good. So, yeah, so switching to a very realistic meta level, I've been talking or discussing with you for 20 minutes. I only have 30, right? So, I think I'm on slide 6 of many more slides. Yeah, no. I mean, I think this is what workshops are for, right? I mean, my slides would be, they would be there in 2 years. You can look at them in 2 years. No, this is much more interesting. But I want to actually complete this argument about, about this architecture, because I think, I want to show you some of the work that actually Roberto, who's sitting there, is doing. Okay, so let me just accelerate a little bit and talk about the work that we're doing. So it's about perceiving kinematic degrees of freedom. Some of you may have seen this work. The idea is that kinetic degrees of freedom are important to interact with the world. And that's what we basically do when you interact with the world. You change the kinematic degrees of freedom in the world. If you open the door, you're changing the degrees of freedom of the door, and so on. So perceiving this and being able to act on this perception is a critical skill for any robot to be in the real world. So if you look at these flyers and you imagine them moving, now we think of the eye and this green thing, the retina that's receiving the signals. So there's some pixels, if you want, that are moving, right? That's in a way the input. And so now I want to take this idea of these interconnected loops, starting from sensor information, and I want to translate that into an algorithm, right? So let's see where that takes us. So here on this side, the input is our sensor information. And at the lowest level, what we do, the first loop, what it does is it's tracking these features. So we're tracking feature motion. And so the output is the motion of these features. The next level now can take these estimated features and can distinguish between different groups of features. Some groups, the ones that are on one rigid body, they move in a consistent way. Features on some other rigid body move in a different way. So when the output of the first box, of the first loop, right, into the second loop, was just a feature motion, the output of the second loop now is rigid body motion in the image. And obviously, if you want to understand the kinematics of the scene, then we're going to use the output of this second loop, which are the rigid bodies, to analyze how they move relative to each other. And if they move consistent with the revolute joint, then we're going to say, okay, these two bodies that we've identified in the previous step, based on features moving in the scene from the previous step, are connected by a revolute joint. So we're sort of really 5? My clock says 23.
Yeah, that's 5 minutes for question.
Oh, I thought it was 30 plus 5.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'll speak up even more. So the idea is that, each of these loops, why is it beneficial to divide the problem into these loops? Because any one of these loops can exploit a particular property of the world. The feature tracking is using the fact that features don't jump around randomly, right? If we have estimated the velocity of the feature, we can predict where it's going to be, and this is going to reduce the search space in the image for finding the feature at the next time step. The same thing is true for rigid body physics, right? It's telling us how features should move, so we're exploiting that to group those features. And kinematic models helps us predict these things. But now, something magic, I think, it's not magic because it's super, super simple, but something really cool is happening. If you look at the kinematic model, it's being fed down to the next lower level because it's constraining the way that we should estimate how rigid bodies are moving. If we know two rigid bodies are connected by a revolute joint, then we don't need to search over a very large space of hypotheses in the next time step. We can simply say, okay, these two need to remain connected. That's something we know about the world. And so something that we estimated at the top, right, or at the right, is being fed all the way down and is helping us to track features more easily. So all these levels interact and help each other. Right? And that's really a key feature for achieving robustness, I think. Right? And if we keep thinking back about it, to me, the similarity to the brain and the visual cortex and how it's structured is just striking. This is not a scientific argument that I'm making, right? Because we don't really know how all that stuff works, but the architectural similarity to me is striking. Anyway, I'll show you for a second.
Just on that, sorry about the time so the argument you're making there is a well-rehearsed one, right? So we've been doing many of these things for many years. That we built some certain model, and based on that model, we can tell whatever the likelihood of seeing some data and moving it in a way. That's fine.
Yes.
If I run cycles, run it. But now, in terms of the introspection conversation, though, this is a bit of an interesting one, right? Because ultimately, if you ask me about sort of what I believe in introspection to some degree without, it's very much about the plausibility of the model that you see in the first place. So we talk about what comes first, features or the model in your case,
how plausible is whatever kinematic model my features to induce to exist, right? So you might say there's only 6 of them in the world. I don't know, that's not a conversation about that, that's cool, right? But looking at sort of the range, the space of possible hypotheses about your kinematic model, and taking into account which ones are plausible, given what else you might know about the world, given also the mechanism by which you arrive at, by which you form the inference on which ones might be those. That is a lot closer to sort of the introspection idea than.
This is exactly what's going on here. Right? So for example, on the right, you can have multiple hypotheses about kinematic models that you're observing, right? So you just watch 2 things that are moving. Actually, let's look at the videos, you will see this. So now, you know, this object is being pulled. This is an easy one, right? Green is always prismatic joints. You see this cone indicates uncertainty. And you saw that first they thought it was a prismatic joint, right? Because the motion at the beginning of a prismatic and a revolute joint are similar. So it maintains all hypotheses, and it picks obviously the one that is most likely. And often in the beginning, when there's not much motion yet, some motion, you know, the prismatic joints are easy, but the revolute joints in the beginning all look like prismatic joints. Right? So yes, this is exactly what's going on. You're defining a state of hypotheses, and within these hypotheses, you're assessing how well does, you know, this set of hypotheses match my data. And this is, I mean, this is exactly what a base filter does, and this is nothing but interconnected base filters.
Okay, so in those experiments, does everything that you've shown belong to a particular hypothesis? So what I'm saying is the hypothesis that complete in the context of what you showed?
Well, you know, we have hypothesis set that consists of revolute and prismatic joints.
Right.
Right.
So I'm not asking whether that's simple or not. What I'm asking is, in those experiments, is the set of hypotheses that you have describing every single object that you see correctly?
Yes.
Okay. So that's interesting, right? Because that's not really the world that we live in outside this particular space.
That's because we pick the objects, right? I mean,
well, which is fine. But so the world that I live in, for example, like we look at perception, I don't really have that. So it may well be that I might say something to the car.
okay. So
even though it's something totally different.
yeah. So the question is, how do you come up with the priors, right? The priors tell you. I mean, so you can have a universal representation of hypotheses, right? That is not a useful thing. The idea here is that the prior that you're using narrows down the set of possible hypotheses you can have about the phenomena that this particular box is concerned about. Right? And so you're using that prior to interpret your sensor data. And without that, I would claim you're lost. Right? I mean, you have to.
But that's also not entirely true, right? Because your prior, so in the strict sense of that, your prior is some form of distribution over a set of things that you know about.
Yes.
Right? What I'm talking about, also my motivation for looking into this sort of idea of introspection was the fact that what if the thing that I'm looking at is not actually my prior set? What happens then? And I see that all the time. It may well be that you don't.
Okay, but it's a very simple question. You're screwed, right? Because I mean, you cannot.
Right, so you're saying I'm screwed, but that's interesting, right? Because ultimately, my machine may absolutely be screwed, which is why we're having this workshop, right? But at the same time, I can look at something and go, actually, that doesn't really fit what I thought.
Okay, so
it's looking beyond sort of the prior idea of this is my set of things.
Yeah. I think I'm now officially out of time.
Okay, it's fine.
It's fine. Okay, so I mean, it's a very simple argument, right? You're getting data, and somehow you're trying to interpret that data. If you don't know anything about your data, there's no way you can interpret it, right? Because the set of possible hypotheses that is consistent with your data, no matter how much data you've seen, remains infinite. So only when you know something to narrow down the space of possible interpretations can you actually do the interpretation. So clearly you need to make some assumptions about your data. Well, if these assumptions are wrong, well, that's it. You're lost. This is just a fact of life.
Right. So in my robots, that's that. In people, I don't do it.
Oh.
Because I can still look at them. I can still have an idea of I'm expecting these 5 things.
Okay, let me
know what I don't know.
Let me show
By
you.
the way, going outside of philosophy, going into sort of psychology, is this idea of metaphysics.
Well, so let's go to psychology.
Can you use the microphone, please? It's over there.
Okay, so why don't you guys all look at this? Look at the white dot, okay? I'm gonna play a video, just keep looking at this white dot. I need to, how can I, here we go. I'm making dots, but I cannot play the video. Sorry. There it was. Excellent. So this is the.
You first have to switch off
the pen, right? But how do I do that?
right click maybe.
Here we go. Look at the white spot. Look at the white spot. So you see, no, I'm not going to tell you what you see. Okay, so can somebody tell me what they saw? So you know, the points were flickering in the beginning, right? And then when they started moving, that flickering sort of was subdued. And then when it stopped flickering, it resumed. Well, if you now track one particular one of these points, right? Don't look at the white thing. Track through the motion of the white point. One of these points. Nothing happens. I mean, the color change does not change. Right? So what happens here? And if you rotated your head with the rotation, you would see nothing. It would just continue flipping, right? So what happens is that the fact that you're perceiving motion is suppressing your perception of the color change. Right? This is exactly what it is. There is a prior that you have about the world, which is it's more important to perceive movement and to perceive color change, which is affecting your perceptual system. It's affecting the set of hypotheses that you can make about the world. And it's therefore affecting what you can extract from the world. So this is exactly the proof that humans have exactly the same problem. Other example.
Have a look at this. What do you hear? But look what happens when we change the picture. And yet, the sound hasn't changed. In every clip, you are only ever hearing ba with a B.
Another thing, right? I mean, the visual perception of somebody going is changing your auditory perception from ba to va. I mean, I don't know if this happened to you. For most people, this happens. This is called the McGurk effect. Right? So this is exactly what we're talking about. You have a way, you have an assumption about how the world works, which is affecting your interpretation of your data. And you cannot jump out that. Even though if I showed it to you again, you would still perceive here, va, va, va. It's because the set of hypotheses that your brain is allowing you does not include, the real thing. And it's the right thing to do for the brain in terms of survival, because this doesn't happen. That's, somebody, is changing the video on an auditory track, right? This is just illustrating that the space of hypotheses that we have is limited. Right? And so any amount of introspection that you can do into that process does not help you get over this. It does not help you get over the color perception. It does not help you get over the McGurk effect.
With all these effects, that is actually like my immediate experience of it. And if I then, I know this effect, so I cannot convince myself in a way that I hear it different, but I know it, and so this could be called introspection.
So, but now we've jumped, a billion levels of abstraction in the brain, and so the question is what you call introspection the fact that we've jumped these other levels and we have no other explanation for this, very logical and continuous processing of information, which I would advocate, right? I mean, that basically we don't know what's going on, and therefore we say, oh, that's amazing, we call it introspection. But I think it's, okay, but I think this guy's going to kill me. So basically, I wanted to tell you about how we, or Roberto has developed a method that actually does exactly this, that has interconnected perception loops, that processes multimodal information, and that allows you to predict these perceptual outcomes. Right? That is exactly, I mean, the whole thing that we discussed is exactly what Roberto is doing in his talk on Tuesday. Let me just, Tuesday. Everything that I didn't manage to talk about, if you're curious about it, you can go to Roberto's talk on Tuesday afternoon, and he will tell you, the sort of the algorithms behind this view of information processing as interconnected loops. So I really appreciate you sort of taking over my presentation. I really do. I think that's, those are the presentations I enjoy the most. Yeah, and it's fortunate that Roberto is here and can tell you the truth about all of this on Tuesday. So thanks for your interruption. I really appreciate it.